I'm Daisy, 25 years old, living in a small apartment in Chicago after leaving my parents' home. Growing up with my younger siblings, Jake and Lily, I faced a deeply unfair division of household responsibilities. When I finally confronted my parents about this inequality, they dismissed me as being too sensitive, which led to my decision to move out that same day. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like mine. My family consisted of my father, Thomas, my mother, Karen, and my two younger siblings. Dad worked as an engineer at a local firm, bringing home a comfortable income, but also carrying with him a strict demeanor and high expectations, especially for me. At 48, he maintained an authoritative presence in our household, and his word was essentially law. Mom, 46, worked part-time at the local grocery store. While she had a gentler approach than Dad, she consistently favored my siblings and rarely stood up for me when I voiced concerns. Then there was Jake, my brother, who was 17 and the golden boy of the family. Athletic and charming, Jake participated in every sport imaginable, from football to swimming. Mom and Dad never missed his games, proudly displaying his trophies throughout our house. His athletic commitments became the perfect excuse for him to avoid any household responsibilities. My sister Lily, 15, was the baby of the family and knew exactly how to use that to her advantage. With her sweet smile and manipulative tactics, she managed to escape any form of responsibility around the house. If asked to do something, she would either pretend not to hear or create such a dramatic scene that my parents would eventually give up and turn to me instead. As the firstborn, I once held a special place in my parents' hearts. I still have faded photographs from when I was their only child, their faces beaming with pride at my smallest achievements. Dad would carry me on his shoulders during weekend outings, and Mom would spend hours reading me bedtime stories. Those memories feel like they belong to someone else's life now. Everything changed when Jake was born when I was 8. Suddenly, I wasn't the center of attention anymore. I tried to be understanding, helping Mom with the baby, and trying to be a good big sister. But I noticed how Dad would rush past me to show visitors his new son, how family conversations revolved around Jake's milestones rather than my achievements at school. The pattern became even more pronounced when Lily arrived 2 years later. By then, I had fully transitioned from beloved only child to built-in helper. The shift wasn't immediate or obvious, but looking back, I can trace how my role in the family fundamentally changed. It started when I was around 10 years old, with simple tasks like setting the dinner table or helping clear dishes after meals. I was happy to contribute, feeling grown up and responsible. Mom would thank me with a quick pat on the head, and I would beam with pride at being her big helper. By the time I turned 13, the list of my responsibilities had grown considerably. I was now expected to help prepare meals, vacuum the living room, fold laundry, and keep an eye on my siblings after school until Mom got home from work. What had started as occasional helping had morphed into daily expectations. At 14, I was essentially running the household in terms of chores. My mornings began with making breakfast for everyone before school. Afternoons were filled with cleaning, dinner preparation, and helping my siblings with homework, even though I had my own schoolwork to manage. Weekends weren't for relaxation. They were for deep cleaning, the bathrooms, changing bed sheets, and doing grocery shopping with Mom, where I was expected to push the cart and help load everything into the car. In the beginning, I didn't mind too much. I felt a sense of pride in being trusted with these responsibilities. I enjoyed the rare moments when Dad would nod approvingly at a well-prepared meal, or when Mom would tell her friends what a help I was around the house. But as time went on, the burden became heavier, especially when I realized my siblings weren't being held to the same standards. Whenever I would question this imbalance, my parents had a ready arsenal of explanations that at the time seemed reasonable enough to my young mind. "You're the oldest, Daisy. You need to set an example for your brother and sister," Dad would say firmly, as if this explained everything. Mom's approach was more gentle but equally dismissive. "Honey, you're so good at keeping things organized. Jake and Lily just don't have your natural talent for household management." This backhanded compliment was meant to flatter me into compliance, and for a while it worked. Another favorite explanation was about preparing me for the real world. "You'll thank us one day," Dad would insist. We're teaching you valuable life skills. Your brother and sister have plenty of time to learn these things later. When I pointed out that I was spending hours on chores while Jake and Lily were free to pursue extracurricular activities and spend time with friends, Mom would sigh and say, "They're still young, sweetie. They need time for play and development. You're more mature." I didn't understand why my development and free time weren't equally important, but I swallowed my objections. After all, these were my parents, and I trusted that they had my best interests at heart. I believed that eventually, as my siblings grew older, they too would take on their fair share of responsibilities. Little did I know that this unfair dynamic would continue for years to come, shaping my place within our family and ultimately leading to a breaking point that would change everything. By the time I reached 15, the disparity in how my parents treated me versus my siblings became impossible to ignore. My daily routine had become an exhausting marathon of responsibilities that left little room for anything else. My alarm would go off at 5:30 every morning. While the rest of the house slept, I would quietly make my way to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for everyone. Dad liked his eggs just so Mom preferred a light breakfast with her coffee. Jake needed protein for his sports, and Lily would only eat if her toast was cut into perfect triangles with the crusts removed. After setting everything out and making sure the kitchen was spotless, I would rush to get myself ready for school. After a full day of classes, when most of my friends were heading to extracurricular activities or hanging out together, I would head to my part-time job at the Coffee Corner, a local cafe a few blocks from our school. I had started working there to save money for college, knowing that my parents were focused on setting aside funds for Jake's potential sports scholarships and Lily's dance lessons. I would work until 6, then rush home to start dinner. Mom would occasionally help, but more often than not she was driving Jake to practice or attending one of Lily's recitals. Dad usually came home just in time to eat, rarely offering to help with preparation or cleanup. After dinner, I would wash the dishes, wipe down the counters, and often throw in a load of laundry before finally sitting down to tackle my homework, usually well past 9 o'clock. By then, exhaustion would make it difficult to focus, but I pushed through, determined not to let my grades slip despite everything else on my plate. Meanwhile, Jake and Lily lived in a completely different reality. Jake's only responsibility was keeping his sports equipment organized, which he rarely did. His dirty uniforms would be left strewn across the bathroom floor for me to collect and wash. Lily contributed nothing to household maintenance, spending her afternoons texting friends or practicing dance routines in her room, her used dishes often left wherever she happened to be when she finished eating. After months of this routine taking its toll, I decided to approach my parents with my concerns. I chose a Sunday evening when everyone seemed relaxed after dinner. Jake was at a friend's house, and Lily was in her room, giving me a rare opportunity to speak with my parents privately. "Mom, Dad, can we talk about something?" I began cautiously, sitting across from them at the dining table I had just cleared. Dad glanced up from his tablet. "What is it, Daisy?" "I'm checking some work emails." I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about how the chores are divided in our house. I feel like I'm doing almost everything, and Jake and Lily aren't really contributing at all." Mom exchanged a look with Dad before responding. "Sweetie, we know you do a lot around here, and we appreciate it. But your brother has his sports commitments, and Lily is still learning. You're just naturally more responsible." "But that's not fair," I pressed. "I have school and work too, and Lily is 13 now, older than I was when I started doing most of the housework." Dad set down his tablet with a sigh. "Daisy, I think you're being a bit too sensitive about this. Every family works differently, and this is how ours functions. We all have our roles." "But why is my role doing everything while they do nothing?" My voice cracked slightly with frustration. "That's an exaggeration," Mom said, her tone growing defensive. "You're not doing everything." But I was. And when I tried to list all of my responsibilities compared to my siblings, Dad cut me off. "That's enough, Daisy. This is just how our family operates right now. When Jake and Lily are older, things will change. For now, we need you to be the responsible one." They promised to talk to my siblings about helping more, but nothing changed. If anything, the following weeks only brought more stark examples of the double standard at play in our home. One particularly frustrating incident occurred when Jake accidentally knocked over a shelf in the garage while tossing a football around where he shouldn't have been. Sports equipment, tools, and boxes came crashing down, creating a massive mess. Instead of making him clean it up, Dad called me to handle it. "Daisy, come help straighten up the garage," he shouted upstairs where I was studying for a biology test. When I came down and saw the chaos, I asked, "Didn't Jake do this? Shouldn't he be cleaning it up?" Dad frowned. "He has practice in 20 minutes. Just take care of it, please. You know where everything goes anyway." I spent 2 hours reorganizing the garage while Jake went off to practice, returning later to praise from Mom about how well he had played that day. Not a word was mentioned about the mess he'd created or my time spent fixing it. Lily was no better. She had a habit of trying on multiple outfits before deciding what to wear, leaving discarded clothes all over her room and the bathroom. When Mom would finally notice the piles of clothing, her solution wasn't to ask Lily to clean up after herself. "Daisy, could you please gather up your sister's laundry when you do yours? Her room is getting out of control again." These incidents happened so frequently that they became the norm, invisible to everyone but me. My resentment grew, but so did my resignation. I began to accept that this was simply my lot in life, at least until I could find a way out. The effects of this constant burden started to show in other areas of my life. My grades, once consistently at the top of my class, began to slip. My English teacher, Ms. Thompson, kept me after class one day to ask if everything was all right. "You seem tired all the time, Daisy," she said gently, "and your last 2 essays weren't up to your usual standard. Is something going on at home?" I considered telling her everything, but instead just mumbled something about having trouble sleeping. What could she do anyway? This was my family's normal. My best friend Sarah was more persistent. After I canceled plans with her for the third time in a month because I needed to help at home, she confronted me. "This isn't right, Daisy," she said during lunch period. "You're missing out on everything. We barely see you anymore outside of school." What am I supposed to do? I asked, genuinely at a loss. If I don't do these things, they don't get done. "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen," Sarah suggested. "Maybe your parents need to see what life would be like without you handling everything." I considered her words, but couldn't bring myself to just stop doing what was expected of me. The weight of responsibility had been ingrained too deeply, and the fear of disappointing my parents despite everything still held power over me. As junior year progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Friends stopped inviting me to gatherings, knowing I would likely decline. Group projects became a source of anxiety as I struggled to find time to meet with classmates. My world was shrinking, confined to the walls of our house, the classroom, and the cafe where I worked. Sarah remained my one consistent connection to a normal teenage life. She would often come over ostensibly to study, but really to help me fold laundry or prepare dinner so we could have time to talk. She saw what my family either couldn't or wouldn't see, that I was drowning under the weight of unfair expectations, while my siblings floated by carefree and oblivious. As my senior year of high school approached, the question of college loomed large in my thoughts. I had always been a good student despite my busy schedule, and my teachers encouraged me to aim high. I dreamed of attending a university away from home, of experiencing independence, and a fresh start where I wouldn't be defined by my role as the family workhorse. I spent late nights researching schools, scholarship opportunities, and financial aid options. My guidance counselor, Mr. Rodriguez, was particularly helpful, pointing me toward programs that might offer substantial financial assistance based on my academic record and financial need. "You've got a strong application, Daisy," he told me during one of our meetings. "Your grades are good despite your work schedule, and your essay about balancing responsibilities shows real maturity. I think you have a shot at some significant scholarships." Hope bloomed within me. Perhaps this was my ticket to a different life, one where I could focus on my own goals and aspirations, without constantly putting everyone else's needs first. When the acceptance letters started arriving in spring, I could barely contain my excitement. I had been admitted to several good schools, including Westlake University in Colorado, which had offered me a partial scholarship that would cover about 60% of my tuition. That evening, I gathered my courage and approached my parents with the news. They were in the living room, Dad watching television, while Mom folded a basket of laundry that I hadn't gotten to yet. "Mom, Dad, I got some college acceptance letters today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my nerves. Dad muted the TV, giving me his partial attention. Oh, which schools? I laid out the letters on the coffee table, saving the Westlake one for last. And this one comes with a pretty good scholarship, I explained, pointing to the offer details. It would make attending really feasible. Mom picked up the letter, her brow furrowing as she read. Colorado. That's so far away, Daisy. That's part of what makes it perfect, I said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from my voice. It's a fresh start, a chance to experience something completely different. Dad was scanning the financial details. Even with this scholarship, there's still a significant cost. Have you thought about how you'll cover that? I've saved quite a bit from my job, I explained, and I can work part-time while I'm there. Plus, there are additional scholarships I can apply for once I'm enrolled. My parents exchanged a look that I had come to recognize over the years, one that signaled trouble ahead. Daisy, Mom began, gently setting down the letter. We're just not sure this is the right move. State University is right here in town. You could live at home, save on room and board, and continue to be part of the family. The real message was clear. Continue to be available for household duties. Continue in your role as our unpaid housekeeper. But this is a great opportunity, I protested. The program at Westlake is perfect for what I want to study. Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. Who's going to help around here if you're off in Colorado? Your mother already has enough on her plate with work, and I'm putting in overtime to save for Jake's college fund, since he has a real shot at those sports scholarships. The implication that my academic scholarship was somehow less valuable than Jake's potential sports scholarships stung deeply. What about Jake and Lily? I asked. They're old enough to start taking on more responsibilities around the house. Mom sighed. You know your brother's schedule is packed with sports, and Lily needs to focus on her studies. She's not naturally academic like you, she needs more time for schoolwork. The conversation continued in circles, with my dreams of Westlake being systematically dismantled by practical concerns and family obligations. By the end, it was clear that my parents had already decided what my future would look like, and it didn't include leaving home. That night, I cried myself to sleep, the acceptance letter from Westlake clutched in my hand. I felt trapped, my future being decided by factors beyond my control. The weight of responsibility that had been placed on my shoulders since childhood now extended forward, threatening to shape my entire adult life as well. After days of internal struggle, I made a difficult decision. I would attend State University living at home to save money, but I would find a better paying job and start saving aggressively. This wouldn't be a permanent situation, just a stepping stone. I would create my own escape plan, even if it took longer than I had hoped. I found a position as an administrative assistant at a local insurance office that paid significantly better than the cafe. The hours were more regular too, which helped me plan my schedule more effectively. I registered for classes at State, focusing on business courses that I thought would give me practical skills for future independence. My routine during those first 2 years of college was grueling. I would wake up early to help with breakfast and morning chores, attend classes, work at the insurance office in the afternoons, then return home to handle dinner and evening responsibilities. Weekends were split between studying, housework, and my increasingly desperate attempts to maintain some semblance of a social life. The strain began to show. I developed chronic headaches from lack of sleep and constant stress. My performance at work remained strong because I viewed it as my ticket to eventual freedom. But my course grades suffered. I found myself cutting corners on assignments or pulling all-nighters to complete papers, neither of which was sustainable long-term. Through it all, the inequity at home continued. Jake, now in high school and the star of multiple sports teams, contributed nothing to household maintenance. His dirty sports gear created extra laundry that inevitably became my responsibility. Lily, entering her teen years, became even more adept at avoiding chores, often claiming homework or social commitments when asked to help. My parents continued to justify this imbalance with the same tired arguments. You're just better at these things, Daisy. Your siblings have different priorities right now. This is just temporary until things settle down. But things never seemed to settle down, and the temporary situation had stretched across years of my life. As I watched my college classmates enjoying their independence, forming new friendships, and exploring opportunities, I felt increasingly isolated in my own parallel reality, one where adulthood meant accumulating more responsibilities without any of the freedom. The saddest part was how my dreams began to shrink to match my circumstances. The ambitious plans I once had for travel, advanced degrees, or exciting career paths gradually gave way to more modest goals. Just having my own apartment, just having a weekend free of chores, just being able to make decisions about my own life without considering the impact on my family's daily functioning. I was 22 years old, a legal adult, with a college degree still trapped in patterns established when I was a child. Something had to give, but I couldn't yet see what the breaking point would be, or how dramatic the rupture would become when it finally arrived. I graduated from State University with a business degree and landed a full-time position at the insurance company where I had been working. The pay was decent, especially for an entry-level position, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of professional accomplishment. My boss Jennifer had taken me under her wing and frequently mentioned future opportunities for advancement. Despite this positive development in my career, my home situation remained unchanged. I was still living with my parents, partly due to their insistence that I should save money before moving out, but mostly because the subtle guilt trips about abandoning family responsibilities were effective at keeping me tethered to home. My brother Jake was now 14, a popular athlete at his high school, just as he had been in middle school. If anything, his schedule had become even more demanding, with practices, games, and social events filling his calendar. My sister Lily, 12, had discovered a passion for drama and spent most of her time either at rehearsals or dramatically avoiding any request to contribute to household maintenance. I had hoped that with a full-time job, my parents might finally recognize that my time was valuable too, that I couldn't continue to be the family's primary caretaker while also building my career. That recognition never came. Instead, the expectations only seemed to increase, as if my job were just another activity I was fitting in between my real responsibilities at home. The arrangement had been wearing me down for years, but a series of events over one particular weekend finally pushed me past my breaking point. It began on a Thursday, when my parents announced they were taking a weekend getaway to celebrate their anniversary. They would leave Friday afternoon and return Sunday evening. "You'll keep an eye on things while we're gone, right, Daisy?" Mom asked, though it wasn't really a question. It was an expectation, as it had always been. "Of course," I replied automatically, though inwardly I sighed at another weekend of responsibility. What I didn't know was that Jennifer had been planning to offer me an opportunity to interview for a supervisory position that was opening up. The catch was that the regional manager would only be in town on Saturday, so any interviews would need to happen then. My parents left on Friday with minimal instructions beyond the usual expectations. That evening, Jennifer called me with the news about the interview opportunity. "I know it's last minute," she said apologetically, "but Richard will only be here tomorrow. He's specifically interested in meeting you, Daisy. I've told him about your work ethic and attention to detail." My heart raced with excitement and anxiety. This was exactly the kind of opportunity I had been hoping for, a chance to advance my career and increase my earning potential, which would bring me one step closer to independence. But it would mean leaving Jake and Lily alone for a few hours on Saturday. After some deliberation, I decided it would be fine. They were teenagers, not toddlers. I would prepare lunch for them before I left and be back by mid-afternoon. I called Jake to let him know. "No problem," he said distractedly, clearly in the middle of a video game. "Lily and I will just hang out here." Saturday morning, I woke early to clean the house and prepare food for my siblings. I laid out clear instructions and emergency contact information, then dressed in my best business attire for the interview. I felt a twinge of guilt as I left, but reminded myself that this was important for my future. The interview went exceptionally well. Richard seemed impressed with my responses and hinted strongly that the position would be mine. I left the office feeling optimistic for the first time in ages. That feeling evaporated the moment I pulled into our driveway. There were several unfamiliar cars parked haphazardly around our house, and I could hear music blasting from inside. With a sinking feeling, I made my way to the front door. What I found inside was beyond my worst expectations. Jake and Lily had apparently decided my absence was the perfect opportunity to throw a party. There were at least 20 teenagers spread throughout the house, most with red plastic cups in hand. The living room furniture had been pushed aside to create a dance floor, and someone had spilled what looked like punch on our cream-colored carpet. The kitchen was a disaster zone of empty chip bags, pizza boxes, and sticky countertops. "Jake, Lily," I shouted over the music, my voice barely audible. I marched over to the speakers and unplugged them, causing a collective groan from the crowd. Jake emerged from a group of friends looking slightly sheepish, but mostly annoyed. "Daisy, you're back early." "No, I'm back exactly when I said I would be," I countered, struggling to keep my composure. "What is all this? You were supposed to be just hanging out, not throwing a party?" Lily appeared beside him, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Calm down, it's not a big deal. We'll clean up before Mom and Dad get back." I looked around at the chaos that would take hours to properly clean. Everyone who doesn't live here needs to leave. Now. There were protests and grumbling, but within 15 minutes the house had emptied of guests, leaving only the three of us and a monumental mess. "You need to help me clean this up," I said firmly, already grabbing garbage bags from under the sink. Jake shrugged. "I've got plans with the team in an hour." "And I promised Caitlin I'd help her with her lines for the play," Lily added, already heading for the stairs. "No," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my voice. "You made this mess, you're going to help clean it up. Your plans will have to wait." My siblings looked shocked by my uncharacteristic outburst, but something in my expression must have conveyed that I was at my absolute limit. Reluctantly, they began to help, though their efforts were half-hearted at best. Jake managed to collect some garbage before declaring he was late and leaving anyway. Lily swept the kitchen floor so poorly that I ended up redoing it after she too made her escape. I spent the rest of Saturday and most of Sunday cleaning the house, trying to remove stains from the carpet, and airing out the lingering smell of spilled beer. My interview success was completely overshadowed by exhaustion and resentment. I had missed a crucial opportunity to celebrate and network after the interview because I was scrubbing floors and washing mountains of dishes that weren't even mine. When my parents returned Sunday evening, the house was back in order, though some evidence of the party remained despite my best efforts. The carpet stain hadn't completely come out, and there was a small crack in the glass coffee table that I had discovered while cleaning. "What happened here?" Dad demanded, pointing to the stain. I was too exhausted and emotionally drained to lie. "Jake and Lily threw a party while I was at a job interview. I've been cleaning up after them all weekend." Mom looked concerned, not about the party, but about my revelation. "You left them alone for a party, Daisy, that was irresponsible." "I didn't leave them for a party." I clarified, my voice tight with barely contained anger. "I left them alone for a few hours for an important job interview. They decided to throw a party without permission." Dad was examining the crack in the coffee table. "This will need to be replaced. That's coming out of your paycheck, Daisy. You were supposed to be watching the house." Something inside me snapped. Years of accumulated resentment, exhaustion, and unacknowledged sacrifice came pouring out at once. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice rising. "I'm 22 years old with a full-time job. I spent my entire weekend cleaning up a mess I didn't make after missing out on celebrating a successful interview that could have advanced my career. And your response is to blame me and make me pay for the damage they caused." "Watch your tone," Dad warned, but I was beyond caring about tone. "No, you need to hear this. For years I've been doing everything around this house while Jake and Lily do nothing. I cook, I clean, I do laundry, I grocery shop. When was the last time either of them had a single chore to do?" "When was the last time you held them accountable for anything?" Mom tried to interject. "Daisy, you're being too sensitive about this. They have their own responsibilities with school and activities." "Too sensitive," I repeated incredulously. "I put my entire life on hold for this family. I gave up going to my dream college to stay home and continue being your unpaid housekeeper. I work full-time and then come home to a second job that I never applied for. And when I finally have a chance to advance my career, it gets derailed because my siblings can't be trusted alone for 3 hours." Jake and Lily had emerged from their rooms, drawn by the commotion. Jake at least had the decency to look somewhat ashamed, but Lily wore an expression of annoyed boredom, as if my breakdown was an inconvenient disruption to her evening. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," Dad said dismissively. This is just how families work. Everyone has their role. Why is my role doing everything while they do nothing? I gestured toward my siblings. Why have you never taught them basic responsibility? Do you think I enjoy spending every free moment cleaning up after everyone? Do you think I don't want a life of my own? Mom's expression hardened. If you're unhappy with your living situation, perhaps you should reconsider it. But while you live under this roof, you're part of this family, and that means contributing. Contributing is one thing, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Being taken for granted is another. Being treated like a live-in maid while watching my siblings coast through life without consequences is something else entirely. Dad stood up, his patience clearly at an end. That's enough, Daisy. You're overreacting and being disrespectful. I suggest you go to your room and calm down before you say something you'll regret. Being sent to my room like a child, despite being a college-educated adult with a full-time job, was the final straw. In that moment, looking at my father's dismissive expression, my mother's disapproval, and my siblings' lack of remorse, I realized nothing would ever change as long as I remained in this house. The patterns were too deeply entrenched, the roles too firmly established. You're right about one thing, I said quietly, a strange calm replacing my earlier anger. I do need to reconsider my living situation, and I'm going to start right now. With that, I turned and walked up the stairs to my bedroom, my mind made up about what needed to happen next. That night, in the quiet of my room, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I was leaving not in a few weeks or after finding the perfect apartment, but immediately. The realization brought both terror and an overwhelming sense of relief. I pulled out my suitcase from under the bed and began methodically packing my essential belongings. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, and a few sentimental items went in first. I worked silently, efficiently, the way I had learned to complete household tasks without drawing attention to myself. As I packed, I took inventory of my resources. I had been saving diligently since starting my job, foreseeing a day when I might need financial independence. I had enough for a security deposit and a few months' rent on a modest apartment. My job provided stable income. I had my car, which was fully paid off thanks to years of careful saving from my part-time jobs during college. What I didn't have was a place to go immediately, but I had an idea about that too. Sarah, my loyal friend from high school, had mentioned that her roommate had recently moved out of their two-bedroom apartment. She had joked about me moving in, but I knew the offer was genuine. I sent her a text explaining my situation in brief terms. Her response came within minutes. My door is always open for you. Come tonight if you need to. With that safety net in place, I continued packing with renewed determination. I was selective about what I took, knowing I could come back for additional belongings later if necessary. Right now, the priority was making a clean break. It was nearly midnight when I finished. The house was quiet, everyone having gone to bed after our confrontation. I made 3 trips to my car, loading my suitcases and boxes as quietly as possible. With each trip, I felt lighter, as if I was shedding more than just my physical presence in the house. Before leaving, I sat at my desk and wrote a brief note explaining that I had moved out and would be in touch once I was settled. I didn't provide details about where I was going, knowing I needed some space before any further communication. I left the note on my neatly made bed, a final act of responsibility, in a house where I had carried so much of it for so long. As I closed the front door behind me for the last time, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. There was sadness, of course. Despite everything, this was my family, and leaving felt like acknowledging a profound failure in our relationships. There was anger still simmering beneath the surface, directed not just at my parents, but at myself for allowing the situation to continue for so long. But strongest of all was a sense of liberation, a feeling that I was finally taking control of my own life, after years of having it dictated by others' needs and expectations. The drive to Sarah's apartment was surreal. The streets were empty, and the late-night quiet matched my introspective mood. I kept expecting to feel regret or to turn around, but with each mile between me and my family home, my resolve only strengthened. Sarah was waiting up for me despite the late hour. When she opened the door, the look of understanding and compassion on her face nearly broke me. No words were needed. She helped me bring in my essential belongings and showed me to the spare bedroom, which was simple but clean, with a made-up bed and empty dresser. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow," she said, giving me a tight hug. "For now, just get some sleep." Sleep didn't come easily that first night. I lay awake processing the enormity of what I had done. I wondered if my parents had discovered my absence, yet what they might be thinking or feeling. I imagined Jake and Lily waking up to find me gone, perhaps finally realizing the extent of what they had taken for granted. But mostly I contemplated the blank slate before me, the freedom to shape my life according to my own desires and needs, rather than around the demands of others. When morning came, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had effectively burned a bridge with my family, at least temporarily. I had no idea how they would react once they discovered I was gone. Would they be angry? Hurt, relieved? Would they try to convince me to come back? Or would they respect my decision to leave? I called in sick to work, needing a day to get my bearings and make plans. Sarah, who worked remotely, stayed home with me, helping me brainstorm next steps. We searched online for apartments within my budget, made a list of essentials I would need to purchase, and discussed practical matters like updating my address for mail and bills. "You can stay here as long as you need," Sarah assured me. "There's no rush to figure everything out at once." Her kindness was a balm to my raw emotions. After years of feeling like a burden in my own home, being welcomed so warmly reminded me that I was worthy of consideration and care. My phone remained silent that first day, which surprised me. I had expected a barrage of calls and texts from my family once they discovered my absence. The silence was both a relief and oddly disappointing, as if even my dramatic exit wasn't significant enough to disrupt their routines. It wasn't until evening that my phone finally lit up with a call from home. It was my mother. With shaking hands, I answered. "Daisy." Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I confirmed, not offering more details. "I've moved out." There was a pause before she continued. "I don't understand why you felt the need to leave like this in the middle of the night without talking to us." "I tried talking to you," I reminded her. "For years I tried. Yesterday was just the final conversation in a long line of being dismissed and taken for granted." "You're being dramatic," she said, falling back on the familiar accusation. "We can work this out if you just come home and we discuss it calmly." "I don't think I can do that right now, Mom. I need some space to figure things out on my own." "Your father is very upset," she added, as if this should change my mind. "And Jake and Lily are confused. We're a family, Daisy. Families work through problems together." "That's just it," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "We haven't been working through problems together. I've been carrying everyone else's problems while mine were ignored. I need to take care of myself now." The conversation ended with no resolution, just a tentative agreement to talk again in a few days. As I set down my phone, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and validation. The guilt was familiar, a lifetime of being conditioned to put others' needs before my own. But the validation was new, a growing recognition that my feelings and needs were legitimate, that my decision to leave wasn't selfish but necessary for my well-being. Over the next few days, I established a new routine. I returned to work explaining to Jennifer that I had moved and was getting settled. She was supportive and even excited for me, which reinforced my feeling that this change was positive. I began visiting apartments during my lunch breaks and after work, looking for a place that could become my own. Meanwhile, life at my parents' house was apparently falling into disarray. Through occasional text exchanges with Jake, who had surprisingly reached out to check on me, I learned that no one seemed to know how to keep the household running smoothly. Meals were chaotic, laundry was piling up, and the general cleanliness of the house was deteriorating rapidly. "Mom tried to make lasagna last night," Jake texted. "It was a disaster. I think we all realized how much we took you for granted." It was a small acknowledgement, but it meant something. Perhaps my absence was finally forcing my family to recognize the extent of my contributions and reconsider how they had treated me. A week after my departure, I found a small one-bedroom apartment within my budget. It wasn't fancy, just a basic unit in a decent neighborhood, with reasonable access to my workplace. But when I signed the lease, I felt a profound sense of achievement. This was mine, a space where I made the rules, where I could build a life centered around my own needs and aspirations, rather than everyone else's. As I moved my belongings from Sarah's apartment to my new place, I reflected on how quickly life could change once you made the decision to change it. A week ago, I had been trapped in patterns established in childhood, carrying burdens that were never mine to bear. Now, I stood on the threshold of independence, ready to discover who I could be when I wasn't defined by my role as the family caretaker. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were practical challenges of living alone for the first time, emotional wounds that needed healing, and relationships that required redefinition. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future, confident in my ability to create a life that honored my worth, rather than diminishing it. The months following my abrupt departure from my family home were a period of profound transformation. Living alone for the first time brought both challenges and unexpected joys as I navigated this new chapter of independence. My apartment, though small, became my sanctuary. I painted the walls a soft blue, a color I had always wanted for my bedroom at home, but was never allowed to have. I arranged furniture according to my preferences, not for maximum efficiency in serving others. Small decisions like what time to eat dinner or whether to leave dishes in the sink until morning became exercises in personal freedom after years of rigid expectations. At work, I flourished without the constant drain of household responsibilities weighing me down. Jennifer followed through on her recommendation, and I received the promotion to supervisor. The increased responsibility came with better pay and a sense of professional accomplishment that boosted my confidence in other areas of life. "You seem different," Jennifer remarked one day over lunch. "More focused, more present." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've finally found space to breathe and think about what I actually want, not just what everyone needs from me." Outside of work, I began exploring interests that had been dormant for years. I joined a local photography club, remembering how much I had enjoyed the single semester of photography I took in high school, before household duties crowded out all extracurriculars. I started hiking on weekends, discovering nearby trails and parks that had been in my backyard all along, but that I never had time to visit. I made new friends through these activities. People who knew me only as Daisy the photographer or Daisy the hiker, not as Daisy the family workhorse. These fresh relationships, unburdened by history or expectation, allowed me to develop parts of my personality that had been suppressed by my family role. During this time, my relationship with my family remained complicated. My parents made several attempts to convince me to move back home, each conversation following a predictable pattern. They would start with concern about my well-being, transition to subtle guilt trips about family loyalty, and eventually reveal their true concern: the growing chaos in a household that had relied entirely on my labor. "The house isn't the same without you," Mom would say, which I eventually realized was less about missing me and more about missing my contributions. Dad took a different approach. "You're wasting money on rent when you could be saving by living at home. It's not financially responsible, Daisy." I maintained firm boundaries during these conversations, politely, but clearly explaining that my decision was final. After several weeks, they seemed to accept that I wouldn't be returning, and our interactions gradually shifted to more neutral territory. More surprising was the evolution of my relationship with Jake. About a month after I moved out, he texted asking if we could meet for coffee. Curious and cautiously hopeful, I agreed. When we met at a cafe near my apartment, Jake looked different somehow. Less cocky, more thoughtful. After awkward small talk, he got to the point. "I owe you an apology," he said, staring into his coffee. "I never realized how much you did for all of us until you were gone. Now Mom's making me do laundry and help with dinner, and I keep thinking about how you managed all that plus school and work for years." His candor caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear it acknowledged." "The house is a disaster now," he continued with a rueful smile. "Dad actually had to look up how to use the washing machine on YouTube, and Lily had a meltdown when Mom told her she needs to clean her own bathroom." I couldn't help laughing at the image. Sounds like some overdue life lessons. Definitely. Jake hesitated before adding, I'm sorry I took you for granted. You were always just there handling everything, and I never thought about what that cost you. That conversation marked the beginning of a new relationship with my brother, one based on mutual respect rather than the imbalanced dynamic of our childhood. We began meeting regularly for coffee or lunch, gradually rebuilding a connection that had been buried under years of unfair family patterns. Lily proved more resistant to change. At 15, she was at an age where self-absorption comes naturally, and she seemed to view my departure primarily as an inconvenience that resulted in more chores for her. Our interactions remained strained, though I held out hope that with maturity would come understanding. As for my parents, the process of redefining our relationship was slow and sometimes painful. They struggled to see me as an independent adult, rather than an extension of the household. Every conversation seemed to include some reference to when I would get over this phase and return to the family fold, as if my independence were a temporary rebellion, rather than a necessary step toward a healthier life. Despite these challenges, I felt stronger with each passing week. The constant exhaustion that had been my companion for years gradually lifted. I slept better, ate better, and found joy in simple pleasures that had previously been crowded out by obligation. The guilt that initially accompanied my decision to prioritize my own well-being began to fade as I recognized the positive changes in my life. 6 months after moving out, I received an unexpected text from my father asking if I would join the family for lunch that weekend. Something about the wording struck me as different from previous invitations, less demanding and more respectful of my autonomy. After some consideration, I agreed. We met at a restaurant-neutral territory that helped maintain the boundaries I had established. The atmosphere was tense at first, with awkward attempts at casual conversation. But as the meal progressed, I noticed subtle differences in how my parents interacted with me. They asked questions about my job and my new interests, actually listening to my responses, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. They mentioned challenges they were facing at home, without immediately segueing into requests for me to help. Toward the end of this meal, my father cleared his throat, a sign I recognized from childhood, as preceding something difficult for him to say. Daisy, your mother and I have been doing some thinking. He began, glancing at Mom for support. We haven't been fair to you over the years. We put too much responsibility on your shoulders and didn't appreciate everything you did for our family. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the years of inequity, but coming from my father, who rarely admitted any wrongdoing, it was significant. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. We miss you, she said simply. Not just for the help, but for you, for having you in our lives. We'd like to try to rebuild our relationship on new terms. Their words touched something deep within me, a wounded part that had needed acknowledgement for so long. I didn't make any grand promises or declarations in response, just a simple agreement to keep working on our relationship step by step. As I drove home from that lunch, I reflected on the long journey that had brought me to this point. The path to healing family wounds would be long and imperfect, but for the first time, I felt we might be moving in the right direction. And regardless of how that process unfolded, I knew with certainty that I would never again sacrifice my own well-being for the comfort and convenience of others. That lesson, hard won through years of imbalance and a painful separation, was perhaps the most valuable gift my family had unintentionally given me. 3 years have passed since that day I packed my car and drove away from my childhood home in the middle of the night. At 25, my life has transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I was caught in the cycle of family obligation and unrecognized labor. My career has flourished. The supervisory position that I interviewed for on that fateful weekend became a stepping stone to greater opportunities. Last year, I was promoted to department manager, overseeing a team of 8 people. The skills I developed managing a household transferred surprisingly well to professional leadership, though the appreciation and compensation I receive now are worlds apart from my previous experience. My apartment, once a bare-bones refuge, has become a true home filled with plants, art, and furniture I chose myself. I recently started looking at condos, considering the possibility of home ownership. A small part of me still marvels at making such decisions without consulting anyone else or considering how they might impact family dynamics. The most profound changes, however, have been internal. I no longer reflexively volunteer to take on responsibilities that aren't mine. I've learned to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and conditioned compliance. My time, my energy, and my attention are resources I now allocate consciously, rather than automatically directing them toward others' needs at the expense of my own. Therapy has been an essential part of this journey. 6 months after moving out, I finally acknowledged that I needed professional help to unpack the patterns established throughout my childhood and early adulthood. My therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me recognize how deeply I had internalized the role of family caretaker and how that shaped my sense of self-worth and my relationships with others. Your value isn't determined by what you do for others, she reminded me in one particularly powerful session. You're worthy of care and consideration simply because you exist, not because you're useful. That concept's so simple, yet so revolutionary, for someone raised to measure their worth through service to others, became a touchstone for my healing process. My relationship with Jake has evolved into something I never expected, a genuine friendship between siblings. Now 20, he's in college and has developed into a thoughtful young man who bears little resemblance to the entitled teenager he once was. We meet for dinner at least once a month, and our conversations range from his studies to my work to books we've both enjoyed. You know, he told me during a recent dinner, moving out was the best thing you could have done for all of us. It forced the whole family to confront some really unhealthy patterns. His insight surprised me. I didn't do it for the family, I admitted. I did it for myself. I know. He nodded. That's what made it so powerful. You finally put yourself first after years of putting everyone else first. It changed everything. Lily, now 18 and preparing for college, has had a more complicated journey toward understanding. For the first year after I left, she maintained a distance, seemingly resentful of the additional responsibilities that fell to her in my absence. But as she matured and faced the transition to adulthood herself, something shifted. Last summer, she asked if she could stay with me for a week, to get away from mom and dad for a bit. During that visit late one night over ice cream, she offered her own version of an apology. I was such a brat, she said bluntly. I never thought about how unfair everything was for you. I just took it for granted that you'd always be there handling everything. You were a kid, I reminded her. It wasn't your responsibility to recognize the imbalance. It was mom and dad's. Still, she insisted, I'm sorry, and I'm glad you left even though it sucked at the time. You taught me that it's okay to set boundaries and demand respect. My parents have perhaps undergone the most significant transformation, though it didn't come easily or quickly. The first year after my departure was marked by strained holiday gatherings and awkward phone calls. They fluctuated between grudging acceptance of my independence and attempts to pull me back into old patterns. The turning point came when they began to see concrete evidence of how much healthier and happier I was living on my own terms. My professional success, the vibrant social life I developed, and the quiet confidence I now carried made it impossible to maintain the narrative that I was being selfish or rebellious by choosing independence. 2 years after I left, Mom called me with news that initially seemed minor, but proved symbolic of deeper change. Your father and I have worked out a chore chart, she announced, a hint of pride in her voice. We've realized that maintaining a household is a shared responsibility, not something that falls on one person's shoulders. It wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of how they had treated me, but it was evidence that my departure had forced some fundamental reconsideration of family dynamics. Dad has made his own halting progress toward understanding. Never one for emotional conversations, he expresses his growing awareness through actions rather than words. He now insists on cooking when I visit, proudly showing off the skills he's developed. He asks about my work with genuine interest. And perhaps most tellingly, he respects my boundaries without question when I decline invitations or limit my availability. Our relationship will never be what it might have been had they recognized my personhood and autonomy from the beginning. There's too much history, too many formative years spent in an imbalanced dynamic. But we've found a new equilibrium that allows for connection without exploitation, love without obligation. The journey of healing hasn't been linear. There are still moments when old patterns threaten to reassert themselves, when a casual request from a family member triggers memories of years spent saying yes when I wanted to say no. But these incidents grow rarer with time, and my response to them has evolved from anger and hurt to calm assertion of my boundaries. Looking back on that night, I drove away. I realized it wasn't just a physical departure from a house, but a psychological break from a role that had been imposed on me since childhood. It was the moment I decided that my life would be my own, that my worth wasn't tied to my usefulness to others, that my dreams and needs deserved as much consideration as anyone else's. Sometimes the most profound act of love isn't sacrifice, but self-respect. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family isn't endless service, but the example of healthy boundaries. And sometimes, walking away is the only path to finding yourself after years of being defined by others' expectations. I still have much to learn about who I am outside of the caretaker role that shaped so much of my identity. Each day brings new opportunities to discover my own preferences, desires, and capabilities without the filter of obligation. It's a journey of continuous unfolding, of becoming more fully myself, with each choice I make and each boundary I maintain. If there's one lesson I could share from my experience, it's this. Your worth isn't measured by how much you give, how much you sacrifice, or how well you meet others' expectations. Your worth is inherent, requiring no justification or demonstration. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from situations that demand you prove your value through self-negation. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family obligations and your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that it's never too late to rewrite the story of your own life. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with those we love the most, but they're often the most important ones for our own healing.